The Rift Valley of Palestine. Set 2. From the Dead Sea to the Red Sea. The Dead Sea, here seen from the hills near Bethlehem. In the foreground is the desolate Jeshimon, the wilderness of Judah in the Bible. In the distance is the high plateau of Jordan, in Old Testament times the territory of Moab. Cutting back into the plateau in the center of the picture is the gorge of the Zerka Ma'in. The dark mass in the lower part of the gorge is an outflow of volcanic basalt. Also to be seen is the division of the plateau scarp into 2 gigantic steps, the result of parallel faulting. Here in the wilderness of Judah, the hills are formed of hard limestone covered by soft and porous chalk. This picture shows the effect of the great tilting of the strata caused by the terrific downward pull resulting from the formation of the Dead Sea Trough. This picture is taken facing north, and the Dead Sea is out of sight to the right of the viewer. Throughout the ages, erosion from the mountains which enclose the Dead Sea have built up great deposits of gravel. The surface of the deposits shown here represents a time in geological history when the Dead Sea was higher than it is now. The lowering of the sea level caused further erosion and the cutting of deep gorges in the gravel deposits. This picture was taken near Qumran, famous today for the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The ancient monastery where the scrolls were written stood on the level surface of the gravel deposit. Although the first discovery of the hidden scrolls was made in the high limestone cliffs which overlook Qumran from the west, other scrolls have been deposited for safekeeping in caves in the gravel deposits such as that shown here. Not far south of Qumran is an abundant spring which feeds a small but important oasis. This served at one time as the main supply for the Qumran monastery and also as a farm which produced their food. This picture is taken from the edge of the plateau, looking down to the great steppe shown in the first slide. A wadi formed by winter rains can be seen crossing the surface of this steppe, and then suddenly plunging to the Dead Sea by a very narrow gorge, the beginnings of which are visible in the background. Notice also the difference in the vegetation caused by the different orientation of the slopes. The picture is taken towards the west, and so the slope on the right faces south and receives the full blast of the hot sun. It is exceedingly arid. The left slope, however, faces north, and here evaporation is very much less, and the surface is noticeably greener. This difference is universal in this part of the world, however dense or sparse the vegetation. Once again, the steppe of the eastern scarp can be clearly seen. The deep gorge is that of the Zerka Ma'in, mentioned in connection with the first slide. On the farther side of the gorge, there has been a wide outflow of black basalt. This is a very hard and resistant rock which has protected that side of the valley from erosion, resulting in the sharp edge and precipitous slope of the side of the gorge. Connected with the volcanic activity which produced the basalt are the hot springs at the bottom of the gorge. One of them tumbles over a steep cliff, producing the steaming waterfall shown here. On the shore of the Dead Sea, close to the outlet of the Zerka Ma'in, are more hot springs. At 4 places along the eastern side of the Rift Valley, faults at right angles to the rift have enabled streams to cut back and capture the waters of the plateau surface wadis. The 4 canyons thus produced are those of the Yarmouk, which joins the Jordan just south of the Lake of Galilee, the Zerka, joining the Jordan about halfway between the lake and the Dead Sea, the Mojib, flowing into the Dead Sea at about its center, and the Hesa, at the southeast corner of the sea. The Mojib Canyon is shown here. As with the smaller gorge of the Zerka Ma'in, volcanic outflows from Jebel Shihan, the low cone seen here on the horizon, prevented the erosion of sides of the canyon by the tributary wadis. This picture is taken looking south from near Diban on the northern rim. The canyon at this point is 690 meters deep. All along the edge of the eastern plateau, there was from early times a line of fortresses, protected by the deep scarp wadis, and in their turn protecting the cultivated fields on the plateau to the east of them. An ancient road, running from north to south, connected these fortress towns. Indeed, it still does. After the Emperor Trajan had annexed the Nabatean kingdom with its capital at Petra, Claudius Severus, the first governor of the Provincia Arabia, built along this route the impressive Via Nova, the new road, completing it in AD 114. These milestones mark the line of it in the Wadi Mojib. This picture shows the western shore, less precipitous than the vertical sandstone cliffs on the east, but still steep and rocky. Clearly to be seen are the slopes of the gravel deposits formed at the foot of the limestone cliffs. Also very evident are the lines of the retreating shoreline. Now that so much water of the upper Jordan, as well as of the Yarmouk and Zerka, is being taken off for irrigation by Israel and Jordan, only a very small amount enters the Dead Sea, which consequently loses more water by the intense evaporation than it receives. It is therefore visibly shrinking. The Wadi Mashash begins not far from Bethlehem and enters the Dead Sea about halfway along the western shore. It is typical of the narrow, rocky valleys formed in the limestone once the Wadi stream is cut down through the softer, overlying chalk. The rainy season of 1971 to 72 was unusually wet, and during March 1972, there were some heavy rainstorms over the Dead Sea and the Arahab. Then the dormant plants suddenly sprang to life, and the desert did indeed blossom as a rose. Somewhat south of the Wadi Mashash, on the western shore, is the oasis of En-Gedi. It is fed by an abundant spring and was famous in antiquity for its fertility. In the now desolate wilderness above it, there have been found the remains of an important shrine from the Chalcolithic period, about 3250 BC. It seems to have been a religious center for the pastoral farmers of the region, which apparently had a rather heavier rainfall at that date than it does now. The huge Crusaders' Kerak castle stands at the head of a valley leading down to the Dead Sea. Kerak Castle was begun in 1142 and finished shortly thereafter. It is a towering mass of stone, 5 stories high on the western side, overlooking the Dead Sea. The slope on that side is especially precipitous, but the eastern slope, shown here, was reinforced by tremendous stone glacis. The great height of the castle can be gauged by the tiny figures of two men on the track below. Most of the present building dates from its reconstruction by the Arabs after its capture by the son-in-law of Saladin in 1188. The most celebrated of the fortresses which Herod the Great built to dominate the Rift Valley is Masada, overlooking the Lisan Peninsula from the west. It stands on a huge, isolated mass of rock with steep, often almost vertical sides. Strictly speaking, this ought to be called the Northern Palace, since there is another large complex on the summit of the rock, which is called by the archaeologists the Western Palace. This picture shows the lowest of the three terraces of the Northern Palace, constructed on a platform about 16 meters square. There was a central courtyard surrounded by a colonnade, shown here. The mosaics of the two palaces at Masada, dating from the time of Herod the Great, 37 to 4 BC, are the earliest yet discovered in Palestine. They are generally simple, this being the most elaborate. It has the form of a tasseled carpet with a central geometrical design surrounded by 6 borders with conventional patterns. Masada was the scene of the final resistance of the Jewish zealots against the Romans after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. It was besieged by the Romans, who captured it in May 73. The siege wall, built by the Roman commander Silva, and the 8 camps, 6 around the rock and 2 on higher ground to the south, can still be seen in ruins today. This photograph, taken from the top of the rock, shows one of the larger camps and, in the foreground, part of the wall. Another view from the top of the rock showing the Dead Sea deposits. The strata of the deposits are level, the rock soft and the climate arid. Consequently, erosion has produced here a badland topography, showing all the features of a dissected plateau landscape in miniature. The surface of this plateau is about 105 meters above the sea. Known to the Arabs as Jebel Ustam, this is a dome of rock salt rising to 222 meters above the Dead Sea and about 11 kilometers in length. Erosion has fretted and dissolved the salt into strange pinnacles and tunnels. South of the Dead Sea is a wasteland of much eroded Lisan marls, extending southward for some 24 kilometers until it is brought to an end by a line of low cliffs. At the edge of the Sebha is a line of springs with fairly profuse desert vegetation, including tamarisk and bamboo. On the eastern side, where the waters of the Wadi Hesa lose themselves in the thirsty Sebha, is the extensive oasis of Safi. The Sebha itself is exceedingly desolate and barren because the soil is very saline, but even here tamarisks may grow in the wadi bottoms where water has leached the soil. This is the southernmost of the 4 great canyons which cut back into the eastern plateau. In this photograph may be seen one of the modern Jordanian experiments in arid land farming, in this case a flourishing olive grove. The ascent of Tamar on the western side of the rift is almost exactly opposite the Wadi Hesa shown in the last slide, both being about 24 kilometers south of the Dead Sea. On the eastern side of the plateau scarp has been caused by faulting, and the rock strata remain relatively level. On the western side, however, the strata have been pulled down in a plunging fold toward the Rift Valley. Since the Wadi Mura is the lowest and easiest crossing of the uplands from the Rift to Beersheba, or to the Mediterranean coast, it has been throughout history a routeway, though for reasons as yet undetermined, its importance varied. Near the start of the Wadi Mura are the springs of En Avdat and En Mor, close to the modern settlement of Zé Boker. Each is in the bottom of a deep gorge carved in the immense thickness of chalk deposits which characterize the central Negev region. Though the Negev uplands are of only moderate height, the eastern plateau has been pushed up more and more until it reaches more than 1,500 meters above sea level. Here the plateau edge takes the form of a long, uplifted ridge, dropping in terrifying cliffs and precipices to the rift on the west and fairly steeply, though more gently, to the level plateau country on the east. The ridge is 120 kilometers long, but only a few kilometers wide, and by virtue of its great height, receives on an average about 30 centimeters of rain a year, or possibly slightly more, whereas the much lower Negev is desert. This plateau rim was well wooded until quite late in history. It is bitterly cold in winter and carries a single line of towns and villages, which are found not on the top of the ridge, but at the spring line, just below the rim. Such a village is Dana, shown here, with its terraced fields hugging the steep slopes around it. A closer view of the village shows how the houses are tightly packed together so as to avoid taking up any of the precious agricultural land. The crusading castle of Chaubec, known to the Crusaders as Montreal, was started by Baldwin I in 1115 and crowns the top of a rounded hill. Because of the limitations of the site, it is rather more compact than most of the castles. Inside there is a spiral staircase cut out of the rock, leading down by 365 steps to a subterranean spring, which could be used in time of siege. In the valley dominated by this castle, there are strong springs and a rich area of cultivation. The power of the Edomites waned after the establishment of the Persian Empire in 539 BC, and about 300 BC, they began to be replaced by the Nabateans, who in their turn established a great trading center in this region. They made themselves supreme masters of desert agriculture and commanded the desert trade routes over a vast area. Their great capital was at Petra, further south, where the Edomites had had only an outpost. It is famous today for its elaborate monuments carved out of the dark red sandstone, such as the royal tomb shown in this picture. Their kingdom was annexed by the Romans in AD 106. Jebel Khureish, where the valley floor rises to about 195 meters above sea level, marks the water parting, separating the northward flowing wadis from those which lead southward. This photograph is taken just north of the water parting and looking from the western hills towards the east in the direction of Petra. In the middle distance is the floor of the Rift Valley, and beyond that, the foothills of the great eastern scarp. Water from the occasional storms on highlands flows down to the Araba and produces what for a desert region is quite an impressive vegetation cover, though much of it falls prey to men and animals. The plants, of course, must be those which can resist long periods of drought. They tend to be thorny and have either very small and leathery leaves or leaves which appear only after rain, leaving the plant naked for very extended periods. The larger bushes in this picture are tamarisk, and the smaller shrubs, sagebrush and camel thorn. Notice the characteristic umbrella shape of the tamarisk bushes with their flat tops. This is the result of the powerful desert winds, which in this region are normally either from the north or the south along the line of the valley. The desert is not a place where it never rains, but a place where rain is very infrequent and unreliable. Years may go by with very little rain at all, but the storms, when they do occur, can be torrential and send flash floods tumultuously down the wadis. A whole year's erosion can then take place in one night. The massive layers of sandstone, which are such a dramatic feature of the eastern scarp, do not appear on the western side until very close to Eilat, in the region of Timna. This picture shows the older, dark red Kuwera sandstone in the foreground, and the lighter, more recent Ram sandstone behind it. One of the most startling archaeological discoveries at Timna is this small Midianite shrine at the base of the sandstone cliffs. The entrance is on the left, and the altar up against the rock in the center, with behind it in the corner a small standing stone. In connection with this shrine, the excavators discovered what appeared to be the remains of a tent shrine, and also a bronze serpent with a gilded head. The shrine dates from about the time of the Exodus, and is therefore remarkable evidence of religious practices similar to those we find described in the Exodus story itself. Underlying the vast plateau of Arabia is a granite platform, upon which the later deposits have been laid down. Here it may be seen at the base of the cliffs, with the level layers of sandstone resting upon it. The Gulf of Aqaba is only 5 miles wide. Neglected in modern history until recently, it is now being developed by both Jordan and Israel. The Jordanian town is Aqaba, and the Israeli town is Eilat. Both of them are important commercial ports and also popular tourist resorts, especially in winter. Aqaba is, in fact, Jordan's only outlet to the sea. An interesting feature of the Araba is the presence of a dozen types of trees and shrubs, mainly near the Gulf, and representing the Sudanese type of vegetation, which is normally found only much further to the south. This clump of daum palms, just south of Eilat, is an example of such foreigners. It is believed that these plants represent vestiges of a vast forest, which at once covered the whole area, and that with the onset of the present dry climate, these survived in the warm Araba at places where there was sufficient water. About 16 kilometers further southward along the western shore of the Gulf is this small granite island, about 120 meters offshore. It was fortified by Baldwin I in 1116, and later by the Mamluk rulers after the Crusaders had been forced to leave.